Still talking football now on the SportsMax Zone. This time we focus on the UEFA Champions League. Following last week's scintillating action in the newly incorporated playoff phase of the competition, it's all to play for as the 16 teams jostle for a spot in the next round. Here's the full list of matches over the next 2 days. Milan, Feyenoord leading there 1-0. Atalanta against Club Brugge. Brugge leading there by 2-1. Bayern taking a 2-1 lead into their game against Celtic. Benfica, they are 1-0 ahead of Monaco. Those are the Tuesday fixtures. Then on Wednesday, Borussia Dortmund are 3-0 up on Sporting. Paris Saint-Germain are leading Brest by 3-0. PSV Eindhoven trailing Juventus by 2-1. And we remember so well that Real Madrid 3-2 victory over Manchester City at the Etihad last week. All eyes will be on the Santiago Bernabeu as defending champions Real Madrid take their 3-2 lead back home to the Spanish capital against Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. Following their 4-0 thrashing of Newcastle in the Premier League at the weekend, Guardiola admits that City's chances of advancing are quite slim.
Of course, the victory helped us, but listen, the margin to win in Bernabeu in that position, everybody knows that if you ask before that game, the percentage to go through, I don't know, we arrive at 1%, or I don't know, we'll be minute, but as much you have a chance, we will try. That's for sure. You know, we don't, you know. So we are going like always we have done, but this season, the reality, we have been miles away. If you tell me if you have performed like today, we'll finish 22 in the Champions League. Of course not. We have finished higher. But the reality, we have been really poor in performance in the roles this season.
Yeah, meanwhile, for Carlo Ancelotti, a welcome sight in training earlier on Monday was the return of injured centre-back, the pair of Antonio Rudiger and David Alaba after a 2-week layoff, adding to the defensive options for Wednesday's clash. Now let's take a look now on the thoughts, or get the thoughts of Juan Giarango as we look ahead to this and other matchups. Well, we heard Pep just now say, Juan, that he would rank the chances at 1%, and I don't think there'll be many people disagreeing with him, to be fair.
Disagreeing, I mean, Pep at times wants to minimize things in order to, well, in the event that it does happen, I told you so. And it's also a way of relieving pressure from his team. He's done that a lot of times in the past, so nothing surprising in terms of what he's doing. Now, does City have 1%? No, I think City has more than 1%, obviously. But going into the Santiago Bernabeu ends up being a whole different situation compared to what we were talking about when they were going to the Etihad and having to face off against City. And to me, it ends up being a much more difficult task. Not impossible, it's just a very difficult one.
Yeah, last week when we spoke heading into the La Liga weekend, we spoke of Rudiger being fit enough to play, and it is clear now that he is likely to be in the lineup for this UCL fixture. How much of a boost would that be for Ancelotti and the coaching staff?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a very good point to be talking about, knowing how in this match, especially, okay, let's look at it from a closing out standpoint. If Madrid maintain that advantage and want to preserve it, knowing that you have an Antonio Rudiger that you can offer some depth defensively. I mean, keep in mind, this past weekend against Osasuna, you had Alaba, who was questionable, you had Rudiger, yet basically the entire back line, especially going from the middle to the right, was basically out. And that ends up being one of the reasons why it ends up being a 1-1 draw for Real Madrid, on top of other things. But now you start to get other players and you start to get other options in defensively, and that starts to help Madrid's cause a little bit more. So that's something that one has to start observing and one has to start really keeping in mind for a midweek match.
Yeah, and Manchester City in the EPL, they were able to defeat Newcastle, of course, 4-0. And the youngster, Omar Mamouche, getting that hat-trick one. Should I read into that result? And do you think Omar Mamouche will be starting for Manchester City?
I would say that if your options are hot, why not go for them? I mean, keep in mind, yeah, okay, Omar Mamouche is recently getting into goal-scoring form. but he's been creating options. He's been in front of goal. He's been very participative ever since he's arrived. I mean, look at that very first match that he had against Chelsea and what he was able to do. Okay, he doesn't score, but he was always involved in some way, shape, or form in what City was looking to do from an offensive standpoint. So, yeah, I mean, Mariah, I would agree if Guardiola ends up looking at Marmoush as an option. And maybe it ends up being a better option if you bring in Haaland to start out and have Marmoush come in when you have a bit more tired legs in the Madrid defense.
Yeah, well, Pep Guardiola, he'll have that problem, and to add to the rest of problems that he has so far. Which team, Juan Giarango, needs to win this desperately?
Well, I mean, that's an easy answer. Both. I mean, City to be able to preserve their season, and Madrid because they're Madrid. I mean, I said it last week. I mean, Madrid, based on their pedigree alone, they're obligated to win every single year. Whether they've won the 15th, they have to win the 16th. And if they win the 16th, they have to win the 17th. And City, as I said before, it's a way to maybe not say that the season was successful, but it is a way for them to absolutely avoid what could be a disastrous season if they get knocked out at this particular stage of the season. In the Champions League I'm talking about.
Yeah, very much the case, Juan. You know, it's interesting because you pointed out the Pep Guardiola and how he deals with a lot of these situations by essentially playing down his team's chances. But I think what Pep Guardiola does is goes into a lot of these press conferences with the mind of an analyst, but when it's time to play football, he puts on the mind of the coach, and they're very different. So maybe from an analytical standpoint, and with everything that has happened with City this year, they do have only a 1% chance, maybe a little bit more. But certainly from a coach's standpoint, I think he'll be telling his team something very different ahead of that match on Wednesday.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me on that one. He has to. I mean, you might as well sack the coach. Guys, we have no. We only have a 1% chance. Let's just do what we can. No, I mean, obviously we have to go and, as a coach, you go and say, hey, this is what we have to do. This is what we prepared for. These were the mistakes we made. We have to rectify this, and that. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's no doubt about it that the mentality is going to be, or the discourse is going to be something completely different to what he gave during the press conference.
Yeah, very much the case. Of course, that match is going to be on Wednesday. One of the matches that has my interest for tomorrow, Bayern Munich, they're going to be home against Celtic. 2-1, their advantage from the first leg. It seems close on paper now, but you would expect Bayern Munich to close this one out pretty comfortably?
On paper, you would say also yes. The reason I say that is if you saw the end of that match, you ended up seeing a Celtic that really was bombarding Bayern Munich. And if you start to see Brendan Rodgers looking to say, hey, guys, look how we continue this match. Let's go and continue doing the same thing over in Germany. Maybe if they get an early start and they get an equalizer, things do change for Celtic. I didn't think I'd say that back in November or when the draw was first known. But things have played out that way in the first 90 minutes. I'm just looking at based on how the match ended, not how the match really kind of progressed throughout the 90 minutes. If they're able to continue doing so, Celtic could pull off a big surprise.
But will they be given the opportunity to play like that in Bayern's backyard, though, at home, where they're generally so strong, so difficult to break down, so difficult to beat?
That depends on them. That depends on how they dictate the match. I mean, I could tell you right now, say, no, Bayern's going to win. I mean, that's the easy part. But how do Celtic come into this match? How does Celtic deal with that first wave of nerves and anxiety and adrenaline? That's going to be the key. If they come in and they're able to maintain, if they're the one that says, no, we're going to continue doing because we could do it, because we showed that we could do it, because we could score, and because Bayern ended up showing some defensive liabilities, why not continue doing what we were doing and seeing if we can continue getting the results that we ended up getting, although we ended up being shorthanded at the end of the 90 minutes early on in our own backyard.
Yeah, outside of that one, any surprises for these second leg matches that you think could, pop up over the next 2 days?
Maybe the surprises already happened in the first leg, so it kind of diminishes. I mean, seeing Benfica and the struggles that they've had throughout the season, going into Monaco and getting a win. Now the question is, it adds maybe a little bit more intrigue, is having an injured Angel Di Maria, how well is he going to be if he can play in terms of that match? That to me ends up being one of those. And Feyenoord, how are they going to be reacting against a Milan side that they were able to beat? A Milan side that's going to want to come back, a Milan side that's looking to be hungry in a tournament that historically has been a tournament that they've done well in. Historically, I'm talking about.
Any thoughts on Juventus, Juan? Because they had a big domestic win over Inter over the weekend and are progressing nicely. Of course, not the force of yesteryear. We know Juventus's image as a European powerhouse.
Juventus are doing enough. Juventus are I mean, we saw it in the Derby d'Italia just the other day, that they're doing just enough, that they're still not fully functioning under Thiago Motta the way people were expecting them to be a high-flying squad because of what Thiago Motta was able to do at Bologna. You still haven't seen that quite yet, but they're doing just enough to kind of get back in. I'm talking about just Serie A. Now, in terms of Champions League, yeah, they should be able to advance.
All right, Juan, we're going to leave it there. All eyes will be glued on the SportsMax platforms over the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, for these playoff matches as we see the teams moving into the round of 16. Thanks, Juan. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Cool. Thank you.
I think
I'll
Juan
talk to you
is
soon.
staying
Bye.
with us.
No,
I
he's
don't know
staying
why
with
you're
us.
rushing him off, Lance.
La Liga.
I mean, Lance told me to leave, so I'm glad. Okay, fine. I'm happy to stay.
No, I'll reverse that. I'll reverse that because we have some good news for the Barcelona fans coming up. Back in a moment.